I haven't looked in on Dungeons and Dragons for a while, and with everything going on in entertainment lately, nothing ridiculous can happen there. Right? Dungeons and Dragons kicks off 2021 with its first wheelchair accessible dungeon. Of course they did! But before we delve into the wheelchair accessible dungeon, is it just me, or is it kind of offensive towards disabled people and presumptuous on their part to assume that in a fantasy world where you can choose everything from your height, your width, your weight, your body type, your hair color, your eye color, your race, your gender, I mean, you can even be a refrigerator for crying out loud, that a disabled person would want to roleplay as a disabled person instead of, oh, I don't know, an axe-wielding barbarian who takes people's heads off simply by sneezing at them. But I digress. Let's see some of the things you can find in the wheelchair accessible dungeon. And we'll start off with a D&D classic, traps. And since I didn't want this to be based on my personal experience alone, I dug up a random internet list. So, without further ado, here we go. A gas room.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
I wonder what a wheelchair accessible gas room looks like. Moving on. Scything blades. You know, those blades that come from ceilings and floors and anywhere else. Very wheelchair friendly stuff. Poison needles. A poison needle. Presumably dipped in poison. Meant to end you. Poison darts. Sharp, pointy objects coming at you with high velocity from all possible locations. Presumably dipped in poison, meant to end you. A pit. Well, that's left conspicuously open. So, off the top of my head, what can a pit be filled with? Let's see. Spikes, acid, giant rats, none of which are particularly good for your health. And yes, the good old fire-breathing statue for all your wheelchair torching needs. And while we're at it, we may as well include the falling net and the collapsing ceiling. A classic, in my humble opinion. All of this tailored to all your wheelchair needs. And of course, we can never forget the giant rolling boulder, especially wheelchair friendly.
No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.
I can just picture the next additions to the D&D books. Things like trigger warnings in front of traps. See what I did there? And of course, sensitivity training for adventurers. Because the things lurking around in the dungeon trying to kill you, eat you, or worse, and yes, there's worse, are not really monsters. They're just misunderstood. And speaking of monsters, let's take a look at that menagerie, shall we? You got your basic undead, like zombies who want to eat you, or skeletons who want to poke you with sharp pointy objects. You got your mind flayers who won't be too concerned about your pronouns as they flay your mind. You can always run into a gelatinous cube that is essentially jello made out of stomach acid, that engulfs you and dissolves you while you're still alive until there's nothing but a few scraps of armor and bones left.
Oh! Oh! Oh, beautiful!
You got your werewolves and vampires and gargoyles and all sorts of particularly nasty creatures that want to, well, for lack of a better word, end your day in a very, very, very unpleasant way. And that's just the tip of all the nasty things you'll be running into the wheelchair accessible dungeon. Just picture it. You enter the dimly lit chamber, and you see the silhouette of the evil beholder floating in the distance. The creature turns to you and says, "Before we begin our life and death encounter, may I have your personal pronouns so I don't offend you, and could you please move the wheelchair 2 spaces to the right so I don't hit it with my death ray?" There are no words to express how pointless and stupid this is. Because for anyone who's ever played D&D, you generally get the gist that there's one golden rule, and it's that the rules themselves are guidelines. You can do whatever you want in that world. It's your fantasy playground, and you can be anything and anyone you want to be. And if you did want to play a disabled character, well, you could have a magical floating chair or a steampunk-inspired personal mini-tank. So, in reality, you don't really need a wheelchair-accessible dungeon. However, this is a good opportunity to virtue signal, and that's all this is, a virtue signal. And on a more serious note, if they actually wanted to do some good, they could have put their money where their mouths are and donated a percentage of the profits to purchase good quality wheelchairs for people who can't afford them. Anyway, let me know what you think about this. I'll see you around. Wheelchair accessible dungeons.
God.